Winter came early that year. The trees turned bare, the sky softened to gray, and the cold wrapped itself around Maplewood like a quiet blanket. Clara didn't mind winter. She liked the stillness, the soft silence of snow falling outside the shop windows. What she hadn't expected was how warm her life had started to feel on the inside. James was still showing up more often now. He didn't just come to read. He stayed longer, helped with little things, fixing a shelf that wobbled, changing out a broken light bulb, carrying boxes from the back. He never acted like he was trying to prove anything. He just did things quietly, like he'd always been part of her world. One cold Tuesday, the heating in the back room gave out. Clara sighed, wrapped herself in a thick scarf, and went to grab a space heater. Before she could plug it in, James showed up, holding tools. He said simply. Within 20 minutes, the heat was back. You really can fix anything, huh? She asked. James grinned. I built a cabin once with my dad. Learned a few things. After that, she started leaving small tasks for him. Not because she needed the help, but because it gave her an excuse to keep him close. He never talked about what he'd left behind. Clara didn't ask. She'd learned to listen to the quiet ways people speak, how they show up, how they stay. James was showing her every day, without saying the words. One morning, as snow gently fell outside, Clara opened the shop to find James already there. Standing at the door with 2 coffees in hand, I figured I'd bring you one for a change, he said, offering her the cup. She smiled, heart fluttering. Thanks. They sat near the window that day, talking about books, old songs, and the places they'd never seen. He told her about a road trip he once took across the West, sleeping in his car and waking up beside lakes and mountains. I used to think I needed noise around me to feel alive, he said. But now I think I just needed stillness with the right person. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just looked at him and felt her heart quietly say, "This is someone I could love." Later that week, he offered to repaint the back wall of the shop. The paint had started to chip, and Clara had mentioned it offhand once. He showed up with supplies, no questions asked, as they worked side by side with old jazz playing in the background. Their arms brushed, once accidental, but not insignificant. They both paused just for a second and then kept going. But the air had changed. The space between them was no longer just friendly. After the last coat of paint, they sat on the floor with coffee and sandwiches. Clara leaned her head against the wall, tired but content. "This place feels like a part of you," James said, looking around. "It is," she replied. "It saved me after everything." He nodded. "Funny, I think it's saving me too." They didn't talk about what they were to each other. No labels, no pressure. Just quiet companionship that kept deepening. But everyone around Clara began to notice a change. Her sister called one evening and said, "You sound lighter." Her friend at the coffee shop across the street asked, "Who's the guy with the steady smile?" Clara just laughed them off. She didn't know how to explain it, not because she was unsure, but because some things were too sacred for words. One Sunday, after the shop closed, James invited her to his cabin. She hesitated at first, but something in her heart said, "Go." The drive was short, the air crisp. His cabin was small but warm, filled with wood, books, and the smell of cedar. It looked like him, simple, grounded, real. They ate soup and sat by the fireplace, not saying much. Just being Dot at one point, he reached out and took her hand gently. She didn't pull away. "You know," he said, eyes focused on the fire, "for a long time I thought I didn't have it in me to build anything real again. I thought I'd burned out." Clara looked at him. "And now?" He turned to her. "Now I think I just hadn't met the right person to build it with." Her heart beat faster, but she stayed still. She didn't want to break the moment. James leaned in slightly, then stopped. He didn't push. He waited. And that's when Clara realized this wasn't a man running from something. This was someone becoming something new, right in front of her. She leaned forward too, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, saying nothing. Back in town, the snow kept falling. The days grew shorter, but Clara's heart grew lighter. She found herself humming more, smiling without realizing it. And every time James walked through the door, her world felt right again. There were still no confessions, no promises, just a people slowly learning to trust a feeling they both thought they'd lost long ago. One night, as they closed up the shop, James turned to her. "Clara," he said softly, "do you ever think about what this is? Between us." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I do," she whispered. "More than I'd like to admit." He stepped closer. "Me too." There was no rush, no drama, just the quiet beginning of something real. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to hope, not just for love, but for a life where love could stay. Spring came quietly to Maplewood. The snow melted, the sidewalks cleared, and the trees slowly woke up with soft green leaves. Clara's bookshop opened its windows again, letting in fresh air and birdsong. Life moved on around her, but something inside her had already changed. James was no longer just the man who stopped by on rainy days. He was part of her life now, woven into her routines, her thoughts, her heart. He came by every morning, not just for coffee or conversation, but to be with her. He started helping her with bookkeeping, updating her website, even organizing events like poetry nights. Clara had always run the shop alone, but now it felt like there's even, though they never called it that out loud. He didn't move in officially, but he stayed most nights. His jacket hung on the back of her door. His books sat on her nightstand. And when she made tea in the evenings, she made 2 cups without thinking. They never made a big declaration about their relationship. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain, no big moment. But it was real, solid, steady, growing stronger by the day. It was the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. It's the kind you don't expect, but recognize when it finally arrives. Clara had been through enough to know how fragile things could be. She'd loved before. She'd lost before. But with James, it didn't feel risky. It felt right. Like peace. Like coming home. One afternoon in early May, James surprised her with a picnic behind the shop. He spread out an old quilt, packed sandwiches, strawberries, and sparkling water. They sat under a blooming dogwood tree, watching customers come and go from the bookstore, laughing like they had all the time in the world. Clara looked at him, at the lines near his eyes, the soft way he smiled when he was truly relaxed, and thought, "This is it. This is the life I didn't know I was waiting for." "I was thinking," James said, picking at a blade of grass. "Maybe I stay." "Like really stay?" Clara blinked. "You mean?" "No more cabin. No more drifting. I want to be here. With you." Her throat tightened. She didn't cry, but her heart swelled so full it felt like it might burst. "You're already here," she whispered. They didn't need anything more. No grand gestures. Just that quiet agreement between 2 people choosing each other every day. By summer, James had officially moved into her house. He converted the guest room into a reading room, built a new bookshelf by hand, and started growing herbs in the backyard. They cooked together, took walks after dinner, and spent slow Sunday mornings wrapped in blankets and conversation. There were no fireworks, no chaos. Just warmth, consistency. Joy in the simple things. Clara found herself laughing more, sleeping better. She no longer worried about what others might say, or if it was too late for her to fall in love again. Because the truth was, love had found her. In the middle of an ordinary life. In the middle of her quiet little town. Sometimes customers would ask, "Is that your husband?" When James helped at the register, she'd smile, not correcting them. Not because the title mattered, but because what they had was deeper than a label. They talked about the future once in a while, maybe a road trip, maybe buying a small piece of land. But they never rushed. They were both older now, more careful with their dreams. They knew what mattered was the present, the quiet breakfasts, the shared smiles, the comfort of knowing they weren't alone. One evening in early fall, almost a year after they met, Clara stood in the shop after closing, watching the sky turn pink through the window. James was in the back room fixing a squeaky drawer. She felt this wave of gratitude hit her so strong, it stopped her in place. A year ago, she was alone. Not broken, but quiet. Content, but tired. She never expected her life to change. Never imagined letting someone in again. But she had. And not just someone him. He was bigger than anything she had ever seen. Not in height or noise, but in spirit. In the way he made space for her. In the way he listened. In how he showed up day after day without asking for more than her time and trust. She remembered the first day he walked into her shop. Wetfromtherain.com, kind. A stranger. Now he was the love of her life. James walked out just then, wiping his hands. That drawer won't squeak anymore, he said, smiling. Clara walked over, wrapped her arms around him, and rested her head on his chest. What's that for? He asked softly. For showing up, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Always. Clara Henderson never expected much to change in her life. At 39, she had made peace with the quiet rhythm of her days. She owned a small bookshop on Main Street in Maplewood, Vermont, a cozy place with creaky floors, hand-picked novels, and the soft scent of coffee always floating in the air. Her world was peaceful, predictable, and just a little lonely. She wasn't unhappy, but there was a stillness in her life she no longer questioned. She had her routine: open the shop, greet the regulars, close up by 6. Head home to her tidy little house and heat up leftovers. She didn't expect surprises, and she didn't go looking for them. But then, one October afternoon, something or someone unexpected walked in. The rain had started just after noon. A soft drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that made the whole street shimmer. Clara was restocking a shelf near the front window when the door opened and the wind swept in with it. She looked up, and there he was. He didn't just enter the shop, he filled it. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a way that made her forget what she'd been doing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown leather jacket that clung to him like he'd lived 100 stories in it. His dark hair was damp, pushed back, and his eyes, a quiet kind of blue, scanned the room like he'd been searching for something without knowing what. He carried only a canvas backpack, no umbrella, no phone in hand. Just him and the storm behind him. "Mind if I wait out the rain?" he asked, his voice calm, deep, steady. Clara blinked, then nodded. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. He smiled just enough to make it feel like a private moment. He moved toward the far end of the shop where the old armchairs sat near the poetry section, and dropped his bag beside him. He picked up a book from the shelf like he'd done it 1,000 times before and began reading. Legs crossed, eyes focused. Clara returned to the counter, pretending to reorganize receipts, but in truth, she kept glancing at him. He wasn't like anyone she'd met in town. Most people in Maplewood either grew up there or moved in for a slower life. He looked like someone who had come from noise and lights and left it behind. There was something quiet but powerful about him. The kind of quiet that draws you in, not pushes you away. After a while, she walked over with a mug of coffee. "It's not fancy," she said, "but it's warm." He looked up, accepted the cup, and gave her a look that wasn't just thankful, it was kind. "I'm James," he said, taking a sip. "Thank you." "Clara," she replied. They didn't talk much after that. He read, she continued with her work. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like sitting beside a stranger on a long train ride and somehow feeling safe. The hours passed. The rain slowed, and as the sky turned a soft gray blue, James stood and returned the book gently to the shelf. "Thanks for the shelter," he said. "Picking up his bag any time," she replied. And she meant it. He paused at the door, then looked back. "Nice shop," he said. "It has a soul." Clara smiled, not knowing why that sentence hit her the way it did. Then, just like that, he was gone, the bell above the door chiming behind him. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the stranger with the quiet voice and the eyes that held stories. She wasn't someone who usually noticed things like that, or let herself imagine anything beyond her daily life. But James felt different. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but in a way that made her feel awake. Like someone had come in and shifted the air ever so slightly. The next morning she told herself it was nothing. A random visitor. A rainy day. That's all. But when she walked into the shop and saw the chair he sat in, the book still slightly out of place, she smiled without meaning to. She didn't expect to see him again. But the truth was, from that moment on, she kinda hoped she would. And in a town as small and steady as Maplewood, when you hope for something quietly, sometimes the universe listens. The story, it turns out, was only just beginning. James came back the next week. Clara was halfway through organizing the new shipment of novels when the bell above the door rang. She looked up, and there he was again. Same jacket, same calm expression. Like he belonged there. "Still raining," he said with a small smile. She smiled back. "Seems like it." He didn't explain why he came back. She didn't ask. He went to the same corner, picked up a different book this time, poetry again, and sat in the armchair like it had been waiting for him. After that, it became a quiet pattern. He never said when he'd show up, but he came often. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes once. He didn't talk much. He'd read, drink the coffee Clara gave him without asking, and sometimes they'd chat short, simple conversations. Nothing heavy. But something was building, slow and unspoken. Clara found herself waiting for him. Not in an obvious way, but in how she checked the weather forecast more often, made an extra cup of coffee without thinking, and always left the poetry shelf just a little bit untidy. One afternoon, they sat near the front of the store as soft music played from the old speaker by the register. It was quiet outside, just a few people walking by. James closed the book in his lap and looked at her. "This town is peaceful," he said. "You grew up here." She nodded. "Left for a while. Moved back after my mom passed." He didn't ask anything else. He just nodded, like he understood something without her saying it. "What about you?" she asked. He leaned back. "I used to live in Boston. Worked in architecture. Long hours. Tall buildings. Not much sleep." She waited. He paused, then added, "One day I just stopped wanting any of it. Sold most of my stuff, packed a bag, and started driving." "To where?" He shrugged. "Didn't know." "Still don't, really?" That was the longest he'd spoken so far. Clara felt something in her chest shift. She knew what it felt like to want to leave something behind. Even if you didn't say it out loud, she didn't press for more. And he didn't offer it. Their conversations stayed like that, honest, but never too deep. She learned he had a sister in Nova Scotia he hadn't spoken to in years. He learned she had been married once, a quiet marriage that ended without drama. Just the slow fading of something that never quite lit up. They never spoke about loneliness. But it was there, not heavy between them, just quietly understood. James became a familiar presence. He never crossed lines, never acted like he was entitled to her time. But when he smiled or leaned in to say something low and kind, Clara felt warmth bloom in places she'd thought were long gone. Once he stayed until closing. The shop was empty. Kara was locking the back door when she noticed he was still in the chair. "You're going to turn into part of the furniture." Key smiled. "Wouldn't be the worst place to be." She turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the window lamps. The rain had started again. They stood at the door, watching it fall across the empty street. "You miss the city?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But this is better." She looked at him, his profile outlined by the window light. He looked peaceful, grounded, and something about the moment felt different. Still quiet, but not just friendly. There was a pull between them, slow but real. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You make this place feel like home," he said. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. The words hit too close to something she hadn't let herself feel in years. So she just gave a small nod. Sometimes the most important feelings don't need a reply. From that day on, things changed. Not fast, not dramatic. But change. James started staying longer. They shared more coffee, more conversation. He told her about a cabin he was renting a few miles out of town. No internet, barely any phone signal. "It's good for the soul," he said. She started laughing more when he was around. Not because he told jokes, he rarely did, but because being near him made her feel light. Like she didn't have to hold her breath anymore. She didn't tell anyone about him. Not her friends, not her sister over in New York. It wasn't a secret. Just something she wanted to keep in that quiet space between the two of them, untouched. Still growing. Some days he wouldn't come in, and she'd feel a small drop in her chest. Not panic, just a missing piece. And when he did return, he'd say something simple like, "Needed a long walk today," or "got caught up in a book." And that would be enough. Clara wasn't used to needing anyone. She was strong, independent. But James didn't make her feel small for needing him. He made her feel safe doing it. One evening, they sat outside the shop on the wooden bench, the sun setting in warm orange streaks behind the trees. James looked up and said quietly, "You ever feel like you're not starting over, just continuing something that was always meant to find you?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not because she was sad, but because deep down she knew what he meant. She didn't say anything, just reached over and touched his hand gently, and for the first time he held it. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The touch said enough. That night, as she lay in bed, her heart full and her mind quiet, Clara realized something. This, whatever it was between them, wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just friendship or passing time. It was something deeper, something waiting patiently for the right moment to bloom. They hadn't spoken the words, but sometimes love begins long before we name it. And neither of them was in a rush, because when something feels real, you don't need to force it. You just let it grow. That night, they sat on the front porch, the air cool, the stars just starting to shine. No words were needed. Just the quiet hum of crickets, the shared blanket over their legs, and the comfort of each other. Looking back now, Clara often says she never regrets letting him in. Not for 1 second. People ask her sometimes, "Weren't you scared? Letting someone into your life after so long?" And she always answers the same way. "Yes, I was. But I let him in anyway, and it was the best thing I ever did." Because love doesn't always come with loud declarations. Sometimes it arrives slowly, softly, like rain on an old roof, like the turning of seasons, like a man walking into a bookshop on an ordinary day, carrying nothing but a backpack and everything she never knew she needed, and that was the real beginning of everything. Alina sat quietly in the passenger seat as her husband Daniel drove them home from another dull dinner with his coworkers. She stared out the window at the fading lights of their small Illinois town, wondering when her life had begun to feel so small. The car was filled with silence, the kind that had become normal between them. Daniel didn't ask how she felt. He never did anymore. At 41, Alina should have felt secure she had a decent career, a stable home, a marriage of 15 years. But instead, she felt invisible. It wasn't one moment that broke her. It was years of being slowly forgotten. At work, she was overlooked, talked over, even though she was the one who kept things running smoothly. At home, she'd become background noise. She used to dream bigger. She had once been the woman who traveled alone, painted late into the night, and made friends everywhere. Now she just folded laundry in silence, managed spreadsheets. I told herself it was fine. It wasn't fine. 2 weeks ago, she applied for a senior position at her logistics company. It was a role she had been working toward for years. She put in long hours, refined her pitch, and poured everything she had into the proposal. Her team told her she was perfect for it. Even her manager gave her an encouraging nod before the final interview. She allowed herself to hope just a little. Then came the meeting. They gave the position to Brian. He was 10 years younger, louder in meetings, and always knew how to charm the higher-ups. Alina had helped him more times than she could count. She'd shared ideas, covered his mistakes, even stayed late to support his team. And now he was the one celebrating. Alina stood in the hallway outside the conference room after the decision, trying to smile while her coworkers offered awkward pats on the back. "You'll get it next time," someone said. But she knew better. There wouldn't be a next time. Something in her had cracked. That evening, she came home to Daniel watching TV with a beer in hand. She slipped off her heels, her feet aching, her heart heavier than usual. They gave the promotion to Brian, she said. Daniel didn't turn away from the screen. Oh, that sucks. That's all you're going to say. He glanced at her, bored. I mean, maybe they think he has more energy. You said you've been tired lately. Elena stared at him, stunned. So you think I'm not good enough either? I didn't say that. He shrugged. Don't take it so personally. It's just work. It was like the air went out of the room. She looked at the man she'd built a life with, the man who once drove hours to see her perform spoken word poetry in college, and realized he didn't see her anymore. Maybe he hadn't in years. That night, Elena didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored beside her. Her chest ached not from sadness, but from something deeper. Something that felt like loss. Not of the promotion. Not even of Daniel. But of herself. She got out of bed and went to the kitchen. The soft glow of the fridge light cast long shadows on the tile floor. She poured a glass of water but didn't drink it. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and opened an old folder labeled Me. Inside were photos from 10. Even 15 years ago, her smiling on a solo trip to Spain, dancing barefoot on a beach, painting in a sunlit room, laughing with friends she hadn't seen in years. She didn't look perfect in those photos, but she looked alive. She clicked through them slowly, remembering how she used to feel: bold, curious, hungry for life. Where had that version of her gone? Buried under other people's needs, she thought. Forgotten in a routine that wasn't hers anymore. She opened a blank document and stared at the screen. Then she typed the first sentence without thinking. This is the beginning of the woman you didn't believe I could be. She stared at the words. Something stirred inside her like embers from a fire long gone cold. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't keep living like this. She wouldn't let herself fade. Not for her job. Not for her husband. Not for anyone. The next morning she got up early, dressed in her sharpest blazer, and did her hair, not for work, not for anyone, but for herself. At the office, she kept her head high. When Brian walked past her desk with his usual fake charm, she smiled politely but didn't shrink. She had nothing to prove to him. She wasn't going to beg for respect anymore. She was going to earn it on her terms or walk away from anything that didn't value her. At home, Daniel barely noticed the difference. He scrolled through his phone during dinner while she quietly observed him. She wasn't angry, not in the usual way. It was something calmer. Something colder. She knew now he had stopped showing up for her a long time ago. And maybe she had let it happen. Maybe she had spent too long trying to keep the peace, to keep the routine alive. Even if it slowly chipped away at her, but not anymore. In the weeks that followed, Elena started to change little things. She signed up for an art class at a local studio. She updated her resume and applied for roles outside the company. She began journaling every night. And slowly, the woman in those old photos didn't seem so far away. Daniel started noticing the changes too. One night he asked, "What's with all the late nights?" "I'm just working on something," she said, not offering more. He laughed a little. "Midlife crisis." She smiled. "No, a midlife awakening." She wasn't doing this to make him jealous. She wasn't doing it to prove anything to Brian or her coworkers or even herself. She was simply tired of pretending to be someone smaller than she really was. And deep down, she knew the time would come when Daniel would finally see her again. But by then, it might be too late. Elena's mornings began earlier now. She woke up before sunrise, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She liked the stillness, the silence before the world stirred. Her coffee tasted better somehow. Her steps felt lighter. She had started running again, not far. Just enough to remind herself that her body was still strong and alive. Her transformation didn't come with loud declarations or dramatic changes. It was quiet, intentional. She started taking care of herself in ways she hadn't in years. She changed her wardrobe, nothing flashy, just pieces that made her feel confident. She started wearing her hair differently. Subtle, but noticeable. And people began to notice at work she stopped letting others interrupt her. She spoke clearly in meetings and shared her ideas with confidence. And when Brian tried to take credit for one of her suggestions again, she called it out calmly, firmly. The room went silent, but no one argued. After that, they listened more. She also began applying for new jobs. Not out of desperation, but because she was done waiting to be chosen. She wanted to go where her voice mattered. And for the first time in years, she believed she was worthy of something more. Daniel, on the other hand, was slow to catch on. He still came home, dropped his keys on the counter, scrolled through his phone, and asked the same tired questions. "How was your day?" Without looking up. At first, Alina gave the usual fine, but after a while she stopped answering. She didn't need to anymore. One Friday evening, she came home late from her art class, paint still smudged on her hands. Daniel was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. "Where have you been?" he asked. "At class," she said simply. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't know I needed permission." He frowned. "I just thought we'd eat together." Alina looked at him, her tone calm. "You haven't cared about that in years." His face tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you don't get to ignore me for months and then act surprised when I start living my own life." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just walked past him, grabbed a glass of water, and went upstairs. That moment marked a shift. Daniel started noticing more after that. The way she laughed during phone calls, how she'd stay out later, how she didn't ask him what he wanted for dinner anymore. She had stopped revolving around him. One weekend, Alina was invited to a local women's business panel as a guest speaker. Someone had seen one of her online articles about workplace respect and asked her to share her story. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was the right person, but then she said yes. She wasn't just healing. She was growing. When she stood on that stage holding the mic, the room quieted. She spoke honestly about being overlooked, about losing herself, and finding the courage to change. She didn't name names or point fingers. She just spoke her truth. After the panel, people lined up to thank her. Some cried. Some asked to collaborate. Alina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen, respected, empowered. That night, she came home glowing. Daniel was on the couch, as usual, watching sports. He looked up and blinked. "You look nice." She smiled, hung up her coat, and sat across from him. "I was on a panel today. Spoke about leadership, career resilience." He looked surprised. "You really?" She raised an eyebrow. "Yes, me." He paused. "I'm happy for you." But the words felt hollow, like they came too late. Over the next few weeks, Alina kept moving forward. She joined a women's networking group, started mentoring younger professionals, and began freelancing on the side. She was building something new. Something Daniel tried, in his own way, to keep up. He'd suggest movie nights, offer to cook, even asked if they could take a trip together. But Alina didn't say yes right away, because she wasn't sure she wanted to go back to what they had. She wasn't the same woman who once waited for his attention. And he wasn't the same man who once earned it. One evening, he found her reading in the living room, soft music playing in the background. "Can we talk?" he asked. She looked up, curious but calm. "Sure." He sat down across from her, nervous. "I know I've been distant. I know I've taken you for granted," he said. "But I miss you, Lena. I want us to fix this." She studied his face. There was a flicker of honesty. There's something real. But it wasn't enough. "I'm not the same woman you married," she said softly. "And I don't want to go back to who I was. That version of me was lost, small and quiet. I love who I'm becoming now." Daniel looked down. "I know, I see it. And I'm scared you're outgrowing me." Alina didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Maybe I am." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just the truth. She stood up, kissed his forehead gently, and added, "But I'm not walking away. I'm just walking forward. If you want to meet me there, you'll have to move too." He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but knowing deep down that she meant it. Later that night, as Alina journaled, she realized something powerful. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her growth was her answer. Her healing was her victory. And soon, the world would see it too. Alina sat quietly at her desk one morning, sunlight pouring through the window of her small home office. In front of her glowed an email. The subject line was clear: offer letter, regional director position. The company was based in Denver. They had seen her speak on that women's panel. Impressed by her leadership style, they invited her to fly out for an interview. That was 3 days ago. Now she had the job. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a leap. A major leadership role in a growing logistics company. A new life in a new city. A fresh start. She had 36 hours to respond. Alina sat back in her chair, letting the weight of it settle in. She glanced around the room. Everything here had a memory photos on the shelf, furniture they picked out years ago. Daniel's jacket draped over the armrest. Daniel, he didn't know about the offer yet. Later that evening, she waited until after dinner to tell him. He had just finished rinsing his plate when she said, "I need to talk to you." He looked up, casual. "What's up?" She handed him the printed offer. He scanned the page slowly, then looked back at her, confused. "You got a job offer? Out of state?" She nodded. "Denver. Regional director. It's a huge opportunity." He blinked. "Wait, you're actually thinking of taking it?" "I'm seriously considering it. Yes." There was a long pause. Daniel placed the paper down and sat. "What about us?" Alina took a breath. "I've spent years building a life around someone else's choices. Around comfort, around staying quiet. This is something I earned. Something I want." His face hardened. "So you're just going to leave? Throw this all away?" "I'm not throwing anything away," she said gently. "I'm choosing myself." For once, Daniel stood, pacing the room. "I thought we were getting better. We're talking more. That's a start. But it doesn't erase the years you weren't really here with me." He shook his head. "You didn't even give me a chance to fix it." "I gave you years," she said quietly. "You just didn't notice." That night, he slept on the couch. Alina didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, knowing the old version of herself would have apologized. She would have pushed the offer aside, told herself love meant sacrifice. But this Alina, she had changed. The next morning, Daniel barely spoke. He left early, slamming the door behind him. Alina sat in the kitchen, stirring her coffee, staring at the clock. She called her sister in Chicago. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" She asked. Her sister replied, "The right thing doesn't always feel comfortable, but it should feel honest. And this sounds honest." By the end of the day, Alina had made her decision. She typed her reply, hit send, and then sat still for a moment. The room was quiet, but inside something roared. She had said yes to the job, to the new life, to the version of herself that had been buried under compromise for too long. When Daniel came home that night, she met him at the door. "I accepted the offer," she said. He looked like he'd expected it, but still, the words hit him hard. "So that's it?" He asked. "No," she said. "It's a beginning, and I'd like to talk about what that means for both of us." They sat on the couch, the air between them thick. "You're just going to move?" He asked again. "I'm not expecting you to follow," she said gently, "but I'm also not asking for permission." He ran a hand through his hair. "Do you even want this marriage anymore?" "I want peace. I want growth. I want partnership, not just presence." He looked at her, finally really looking, eyes heavy. "You've changed." She smiled, not out of pride, but out of truth. "I had to." In the weeks that followed, things shifted further. Alina started preparing for the move. She packed little by little, donated old clothes, and cleaned out drawers that hadn't been touched in years. She didn't rush Daniel, but she didn't wait for him either. One evening, they had dinner together. He was quieter than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything." She nodded. "Me too. I'm not sure I know how to be the kind of man you need anymore." "That's okay," she replied. "Maybe it's not about who we were. Maybe it's about who we are and what we still have left. Do we have anything left? He asked honestly. I think we have respect. That's a start. He looked down. I should have seen you sooner. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. You didn't, but I see myself now, and that's enough. They both knew the truth. They had grown too far apart. And it wasn't hatred or anger that kept them apart now. It was distance born from years of silence. When moving day came, Alina didn't cry. She hugged Daniel at the front door. He held on a second longer than expected. I hope you find everything you're looking for, Kay said. She pulled back and looked into his eyes. I already have. I just needed to give myself permission to reach for it. As the moving truck pulled away, Alina sat in her car and looked at the house one last time. Not with regret, but with quiet strength. She drove off toward Denver, not to escape, but to arrive. And somewhere inside, she knew the hardest part wasn't leaving him behind. It was realizing she had already outgrown the version of herself who thought she had to stay. It had been 6 months since Alina moved to Denver. The snow had melted into a crisp spring and the city was buzzing with life. Alina stood by the window of her new office, looking out over the busy streets. Her name was now printed in silver letters on the glass door. Alina Parker, Regional Director. She had worked harder in those few months than she ever had. But not because she was proving herself to anyone. She loved what she did now. Her ideas mattered. Her voice was heard. She was building a team of strong women and men who respected one another. She smiled often, laughed more, and for the first time in a long time, this wasn't just getting through the day, she was truly living it. Alina had also started painting again. In the evenings, after work, she'd head to a small art studio near her apartment. The owner, Leah, quickly became a friend. They'd talk about everything: art, career, heartbreak, and hope. It felt good to be seen, not as someone's wife or someone's assistant, but as herself. Back in Illinois, Daniel had felt her absence in every corner of the house. The silence was heavier than he expected. At first he thought she'd change her mind, that maybe she'd call and say she missed him. But the call never came. Instead, he began to watch her rise quietly. From a distance, her face appeared in an online business magazine. The headline read, "Meet Alina Parker, the woman who walked away and built something bigger." He read every word. Another month passed, and then another. She came back to town briefly for a women's leadership event. Daniel saw a poster with her name on it at a coffee shop. She was standing next to another speaker, smiling brightly, dressed in a sharp navy suit that screamed confidence. That night, he looked at old photos, their wedding vacations, birthdays. She looked younger in those photos, but not necessarily happier, just quieter, like she was always holding back. He remembered all the times she'd tried to talk to him and he didn't really listen. How he'd brushed her off when she needed him most. And now, here she was, thriving. Without him, back in Denver, Alina walked into a packed room for her first keynote speech. The lights were warm and the audience was buzzing. As she stepped up to the podium, she took a deep breath. This wasn't just about career anymore. This was about how far she'd come. "I used to believe strength meant staying silent," she began. "That love meant giving up parts of myself so someone else could shine. I thought shrinking was the only way to survive in spaces that didn't value me. But I was wrong." The crowd leaned in, every eye on her. "Leaving wasn't the hardest part," she continued. "Believing I deserved better, that was the real work. But once I did, everything changed." Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She felt sure, grounded, powerful. After the event, people lined up to meet her. A young woman in her 20s said, "I was going to quit my job this week, but hearing you speak, I'm going to stay and fight for what I deserve. Thank you." That moment meant more than any promotion ever had. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Alina looked around at the life she had built. It was simple bookshelves, candles, her favorite tea in the kitchen. But it was hers. No pretending. No shrinking. Just peace. She hadn't dated since moving. Not seriously. A few coffee meets here and there, but nothing lasting. And that was okay. She was still healing, still learning what it meant to love herself first. One evening, the familiar name popped up on her phone. Daniel, one new message. Just saw your article. You look happy. I'm proud of you. She stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she sat with the message. Letting it settle, she thought about the girl she used to be, the one who waited by the phone, hoping for someone else to give her worth. And she thought about the woman she was now, who didn't need validation, only truth. Eventually, she replied, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well too." It was short, kind, complete. There was no bitterness left in her heart. Just clarity. The past had shaped her, but it no longer owned her. Daniel had been part of her story, but he wasn't the ending. Weeks later, she stood in her new home, her paintings on the walls. Her dog curled up on the rug and felt something deep. Something quiet but strong. Not pride, not relief, but wholeness. Alina hadn't just walked away from a marriage. She had walked back to herself, and in doing so, she hadn't just survived betrayal, disappointment, and being overlooked. She had won.